Constitutional Conversations is a series of discussions by America's leading scholars about the principles, framing, ratification, and implementation of constitutional government in the United States. This series is hosted by the James Madison Memorial Fellowship Foundation of Alexandria, Virginia.
One of the classic ways to think about the decade that passes from the Declaration of Independence in 1776 to the adoption of the Federal Constitution in 1787, 1788 is really, in a sense, to set them up as two poles, to suggest that there were more democratic, more egalitarian, more radical impulses at work in the first flush of revolution, in the first flush of independence, and that a kind of reaction set in the late 1780s. That there was a conscious effort by people like James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, George Washington, to name a random few, to kind of cut back or kind of retrench against some of the excesses that had taken place. And that's, in a lot of ways, that's a perfectly fair judgment. There was a great deal of alarm in elite circles, and particularly in the circles around those men, about the character of politics at the state level. A lot of criticism of issues like paper, the use of paper money, which kind of erodes the honest value of debts. A lot of criticisms of the kind of character of lawmaking going on in the states. James Madison, who plays obviously played in my view, the leading role in the politics of writing the federal Constitution. Madison was deeply depressed by the by the legislative ability or the lack of ability of the men he served with, back in the Virginia legislature. So in one sense, it's easy to see the Constitution of 1787 simply as a reaction against a more democratic, more egalitarian, more populist, more radical form of politics that had flourished at the state level. But, and I think this is a significant qualification, the other thing I think we have to recognize is that when Americans started writing constitutions back in the mid-1770s, as they were simultaneously declaring independence from Britain, that they had ideas that might be classified as naive, that they had to act with a lot of rapidity. There was a war on. They didn't have full time to deliberate on issues of government. They were inspired by the way in which the revolution was going. They were inspired by the extent to which it really was a popular and even a populist kind of movement. They had acted in some ways quickly and without having as much experience as they were about to gain. And not only that, I think the other thing that happened is the Americans started innovating, and I think innovating is the right term here. They are dealing with a number of truly innovative ideas in the realm of political organization, in the realm of government. The whole idea of having a written constitution, and of trying to figure out what was its exact legal authority. The whole idea of what is the nature of executive power, a form of power associated with a monarchy, if you're going to have a Republican form of government. The whole idea of having a bicameral legislature in a Republican society. It's one thing to have a bicameral legislature in England, where you actually have an aristocracy that commands its own political voice. There is no aristocracy in America, yet Americans were attracted to the idea of bicameral government. But that raises a question, if you have two houses, what do the different houses represent? Are they two forms of expressing the same voice, or maybe one house should represent one thing and the other house should represent another? The whole question of what role should courts play in monitoring the adequacy, you could say the legality or the constitutionality of legislation. The whole question of will we be better served by having representatives elected annually, maybe a 2 or even a 3-year term might be better. Maybe they'll be better legislators. They have more experience in office. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the revolution generates a lot of really interesting and provocative questions for which there weren't all that many precedents, either in American experience or in the larger experience of the Atlantic world. And so in that sense, when you look and see what happened in 1787, when you look at the debates at the Philadelphia Convention and then the debates that follow in the separate states and this kind of remarkable process that goes on for the better part of a year or technically longer until all 13 states, the original states have ratified the Constitution. What you see is that in a certain sense, you can really treat this whole long decade as a single unit and to try to trace the evolution of ideas. So it's not to say that what happened in the late 1780s was just a reaction against what had happened in the mid-1770s, that's a bit specious in some ways. All these ideas were put into play, and people like Madison, Hamilton, James Wilson, the men we think of as being Thomas Jefferson, even in his own cranky way, John Adams. All these guys, in effect, were trying to sort through the lessons of experience. And so it makes as much sense to see what happened in the late 1780s as a culmination of what had begun in the mid-1770s than as a reaction against it.
Constitutional Conversations is made possible by a generous grant from the Fairleigh S. Dickinson Jr. Foundation. Constitutional Conversations is made possible by the James Madison Education Fund.